Hello there. I'm Paul Glumaz, and I've been active with the political movement of Lyndon LaRouche for almost 46 years now. And today is the 9th of October, 2019, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. For those of you watching this, you may have wondered in the back of your mind, or in the front of your mind, or in the side of your mind, or wherever, that all of a sudden Donald Trump has betrayed our allies, the Kurds. Donald Trump has betrayed our allies, the Kurds. Now, I wonder how many Americans even have heard of the Kurds, and how many Americans even know who the Kurds are. And how many Americans knew that they had allies called Kurds? Good question. This absolute hysteria over what Trump has done, which is to allow the Turks to go into just across the border to create a safe zone, to create some safe zones, is considered to be the most incredible thing, the most incredible betrayal of a president. Lindsey Graham, who otherwise defends the president, is out there saying this is the worst thing you can imagine. This is terrible. We're capitulating, and so forth and so on. Now, what I want to do is explain why Trump's decision to do what he is doing, and why his earlier recent decision not to bomb Iran when it was supposedly patently clear that Iran was behind the attack on the oil refineries that would shut down half of Saudi's oil production. Everyone was saying he should bomb the Iranian oil facilities or retaliate. Well, Trump didn't do that. And you have to understand what this means. This is like Trump is saying, today he said, we're not doing this stuff anymore. We went into Iraq and we spent $8 trillion. It was based on a lie. They didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And look what we've done. Millions have died. Our soldiers have died. And, we created a mess. And these people want me to stay. These people want me to continue. Well, yes, they do want you to continue. Why? Because the global financial empire centered on the city of London depends on the terrorism and the irregular warfare and the U.S. military threats. It depends on the sanctions and the threats that the U.S. Can carry out. Because the U.S. military-industrial complex and its five eyes, that is the British and Canadians, Australians, New Zealand, and the U.S. and the EU bureaucracy, they are the enforcement arm of this global empire. And how does it work? You are not going to put money into your economy to develop your infrastructure and your industry, because we're not going to let you do that. We're not going to let you have the stability to do that. You're going to be constantly engulfed with problems, ethnic problems, terrorist problems, what have you. Now, the cornerstone plan for keeping the world completely in an ability to actually carry out their economic development and preventing the infrastructure from being built which is what the Belt and Road that China's promoting. The Belt and Road that China's promoting cannot go through the Middle East under these circumstances. It can't go through Central Asia if the chaos in the Middle East spills over into Central Asia. That's the empire's policy. And they've been financing through a massive slush funds of hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars over the years, through Saudi Arabia, through the drug trade, through George Soros, through every kind of destabilization everywhere in the world, to keep any nation which has nationalist inclinations to develop their economy for the benefit of their people unable to do so. Libya was targeted. They were actually doing pretty good. They were starting to develop. Iraq was targeted. Saddam Hussein was a problem, but he was he was developing Iraq. Syria was a problem. Syria was developing. All these countries have been developing or trying to develop, have been attacked. All these countries that refuse to hand their economies over to the international financial crowd are considered autocratic dictators, whatever you want to call them, whether they were democratically elected or not. All those countries where the elites are totally lockstep into looting of their populations, they don't, and are brutal and kill people and do all of that. None of those countries have a problem. Like Saudi Arabia, they don't have a problem. They're not. There's no human rights sanctions against Saudi Arabia. You want to talk about human rights? I mean, go to Saudi Arabia. Humans don't have rights in Saudi Arabia. The only people who have rights in Saudi Arabia is the royal family, whatever, 20 or 30,000 people now in the royal family. They're the only ones with rights. Everybody else doesn't have any rights. And no one says anything about that, right? So the whole thing is a fraud. The whole human rights thing is a fraud. All of it, the right to protect, the interventions, all of that. Trump is saying no more to that. What does that mean? That means the enforcement arm internationally of the international banking crowd, centered in London, centered in Wall Street, isn't there. Look, all these multinational companies are not national anymore. They have their production facilities one place, their financials other, their marketing others. They're totally connected in with the speculation. You leave the CIA, you go get a job with one of these companies. You're still in the intelligence community. You're still out there, right? You're still doing intelligence. You're still operating. You're still involved in the Middle East in a private capacity. So all these private companies, all these companies have their own intelligence staffs. They're all, and they go, there's a rotating, revolving door where they go in on one level, they come out the other, and then they go into another agency, and then they come out the other, and then they end up being the CEO of so-and-so. And that's how the system works. That's Washington, D.C. And they all agree. We got to keep the game going. So what if we kill people? So what if we bankrupt the United States? So what if we don't develop? We can keep the power by destabilizing the rest of the world, by stopping China, by overthrowing the Chinese government, by overthrowing the Russian government. We can bring the entire world into this chaotic disintegration. And what does this mean? This means that countries which are nations are no longer nations. They're just a bunch of organized tribes, fighting each other. And now they have control over the resources. How much do you have to pay for those resources? Very less. You get those resources out, you can put them anywhere, but you don't pay for it. There's no taxes. There's taxes on the people by the barrel of a gun, but there's no development. There's nothing. Everything goes. It's what the world was. These people want for the world. Meanwhile, the extra billionaires, and their elite can, go to whatever island, and do whatever they want. That's the mindset of these people. So anyhow, the actual technical plan for this region was something called the Bernard-Lewis plan. The Bernard-Lewis plan was to take the inherent problems within Islam. And what is the inherent problem within Islam? It's the idea that the community of believers forms the government without respect to nationality, without respect to ethnicity, without respect to different cultures. So in other words, the idea is you have the Islamic world needs to, from the standpoint of the philosophy of the Islamic, of the weakness. I'm not saying Islam is like this, but I'm saying that there is this conception which can be exploited to promote the idea of a caliph, or those who follow. The following rule. And so this idea of the caliph was killed initially by Ataturk in the early 1920s. But it was revived by British intelligence, Bernard Lewis. You had that one version. And then you had another version of Wahhabi, of the Saudis. Again, and the idea is you have Muslims spread out throughout Africa, into Asia, into Southwest Asia, into China. And the idea is to create total chaos in this region. Now, one of the sub aspects of this is the Kurds. The Kurds have been there forever. They're hills people. They're clannish, right? And the British promised the Kurds independence when the Ottoman Empire broke up. The largest number of Kurds are in Turkey. The second largest are in Iraq. The third largest are in Syria. And the fourth largest is in Iran. This area between Turkey, Syria, northern Iraq, and western Iran, okay, has this Kurdish population. And so they've been promoting this idea of a Kurdish, and so these people are all mountain people. These are all fighters. You're not going to subdue them, but you can make it difficult for them if they want to become independent, and you can reward them, and also at the same time, and if you have a certain autonomy with them, it'll work. But then you have the external interference into this. So when you create a Kurdish independence movement that is a terrorist movement inside Turkey, which from 1974 to now has been a problem, keeping the eastern part of Turkey in a state of constant terrorism, from 1974 on, with the main group being the PKK, which is supposedly a communist party, but it's not. It's a Kurdish separatist party. So what you had is a situation where, while ISIS was being built up by the US and the British and the Saudis, and the Turks were involved as well in a very big way, especially the Turks, Erdogan of Turkey was promised control over Syria as his reward for participating in this whole thing. But at the same time they were doing that, the Kurds were also fighting the ISIS. So the Kurds were fighting ISIS, but the Kurds which were fighting ISIS were also fighting ISIS from the standpoint that they were against Turkey, and that they would essentially back the separatist Kurdish insurrections inside Turkey. So you had the double game being played. One is to get Turkey involved to promote ISIS, which they did, and the other is to create at the same time the weakness inside Turkey of the Kurds, which were being activated by having to defend themselves from ISIS, from fighting ISIS. So this whole thing, it becomes a very difficult situation. So now that ISIS has been being defeated by the Russians, Hezbollah, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, primarily. And the U.S.'s role has been totally ambivalent, ambiguous. The Turks have shifted, but now they have all these terrorists that they have cultivated and developed, who are now being sent back to Turkey as they surrender in Idlib and as they were surrendering in different places. So now Turkey has all these terrorists that they created, and Trump is saying, "Yes, your problem. You deal with them. Right? You created them. You deal with them." But there are also millions of refugees in tents in Turkey. And the Turks want those refugees, now that this thing is being resolved, they want those refugees to go back to Syria because they're a drain on the Turkish economy. And of course, Erdogan's always threatening to send these millions of Syrian refugees to Europe if Europe is nice to Erdogan. So what Turkey wants to do is create a way to prevent the Kurds in Syria, which fought ISIS, from activating and helping and assisting the Kurds inside Turkey, which is where most of the Kurds are, in their insurrection against Turkey, which has been going on since 1974. So the British have used the Kurds to undermine and destabilize the four countries in one way or another, the three major countries in that region: Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. So that's why this is being done. Now, what Trump is basically saying is, we shouldn't be here. We're 7,000 miles away. This is not a threat to our nation. And we should let these people figure it out, work it out, right? People, the interest in the region. Well, who does he mean by the people in the region? He means Russia. He means Saudi Arabia. He means Israel. He means all of the people all of the countries that are close by need to work this out and create a stable situation. And they can work it out if there's not this massive intervention coming in through the international banking system, through the corporations, and through the U.S., and through all the private mercenary armies. If you don't have that going on, then these countries will have to work it out, and they probably will work it out, because it's in their interest to do so, because the Belt and Road is going to be coming through, and they need to work it out. So the significance of what Trump has done and why everybody's freaked out is that he's ending the imperial military role of the United States, which has awesome consequences beyond just, saving lives and not spending the money. This has awesome consequences, because if the United States isn't going to be the military enforcer for the New World Order, how is the New World Order going to be enforced? What instrument can the British use, if it's not the U.S. military, to enforce the New World Order? To keep constant war going, keep constant threats between the U.S. and China and Russia and China. And then this spills over into the Ukraine situation, which played a very pivotal role in creating the environment against Russia. The propaganda against Russia really escalated during the Ukrainian Nazi coup, which was a Nazi coup, run by people like Victoria Nuland and George Soros. And it turns out that element in our State Department and Justice Department that were involved in this coup, it is the core element that ran the operation to prevent Trump from being president and to bring down the president. So the whole Nazi Ukrainian thing is totally tied in with the apparatus inside the U.S. that was running the coup against Donald Trump. But that also ties in to the whole network that was also connected to ISIS. ISIS was being trained in Israel, Turkey, and there was a strong connection between the Nazis in Ukraine and ISIS. So all of this is part of the same thing, and it's coming unglued. The new president of Ukraine wants to clean this up because he can't stabilize the economy of Ukraine without cleaning this mess up that was created by the U.S. So the U.S. and the British created another mess in Ukraine with these Victoria Nuland said that the National Endowment for Democracy paid $5 billion just for these NGOs. Well, who are these NGOs? These are pro-Hitler Banderites, primarily from the western part of Ukraine, who seized power through force, and then outlawed the Russian language in Russian-speaking areas. So, this is what you're dealing with, and that created the conflict. And they were hoping, praying that Putin would send the troops in to protect the Russian population. Well, the Russian population in the east broke away. Crimea, which is almost all Russian, became part of Russia, and ever since then, this has been the thing. So the revelations about Ukraine, as the Joe Biden and his son Hamilton Biden begin to be unraveled, you're not looking at just some corruption of Biden and his son. You're looking at the entire underbelly of the coup apparatus. You're looking at the global destabilizers, an element of the global destabilizer. Well, this also ties into the Hong Kong color revolution that's going on in Hong Kong, or they're trying to get it out. So all of this is seamless. It's connected. It's the empire that's trying to prevent countries from developing. And without having the U.S. military at their disposal, they're going to have a hard time doing that. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing, as Trump would tell you. So, so now, let me get to the next subject, which is all connected in. The global financial system is now back on a life support bailout, quantitative easing life support system, and more banks are trying to downsize their overhead by laying off tens of thousands of bank employees. There's a huge crisis in the banking community. We don't even know who the Fed is giving the money to, but right now they're putting out 40, 50, 60, 70 billion dollars a day in overnight, and everything's being rolled over, and everything's, they're trying to keep the thing from freezing up. Now, not only is Trump saying we're not going to be the military enforcer of this empire, which doesn't help the United States, this globalism, this global financial empire, but he's also the president. And they have to get him out, because when the financial system blows, they won't have control over the situation. And when something like that happens, people don't give a damn. They care about their money. They care about survival. They care about whether they're going to eat tomorrow. They're not going to give a damn about all this other stuff. And so, they're not going to care about LBGT and Green New Deal and all of that stuff. They're not going to care about that. They're going to want to survive. And there's only one institution that can act on their behalf. One, the institution of the presidency. And the Founding Fathers set it up that way. Lincoln declared an emergency. And you had a civil war. And the nation survived. It could not be half slave, half free. It had to be all free. Or it had to break up in a financial collapse, like we had with FDR. The president goes directly to the people and tells the Congress, as FDR did, if you do not enact what is necessary now, I will act on an emergency basis. That's what FDR said to the Congress. The Congress didn't pass FDR's measures because they wanted to. They were told the President of the United States will adopt emergency powers and carry out these measures, the bank holiday, the reorganization, everything, if you don't do it. Lincoln did the same thing. A lot of these right-wing, sovereign individual people look to consider Lincoln to be the worst person that ever lived because he usurped the powers. No, the president can do that, and President Trump could do that in a crisis, and it doesn't really matter at that point what these congressmen think. They either do what they're told, or it gets done anyhow. That's the institution of the presidency. But it only gets done with the mass support of the population, of course. It won't happen otherwise. But with if the support of the population is there to survive, and the president is committed to the population and to their welfare, that can happen. And that's what they're afraid of. And so they have to get him out before the financial collapse. And if they can't get him out before the financial collapse, it's all on the table. It's over. It's potentially over. And the president is showing more and more signs that he's inclined in that direction. And that's what we're looking at. So the impeachment drive is just one small part of the effort to remove him before the financial collapse.
Common stock investments have helped to make our country prosperous and powerful. Owning a share in American industry is like owning a share in the future of our nation. But remember, John Q, there is a risk as well as an advantage in owning any kind of property. So get the facts before you put your money to work.